Enjoyed that. Now that kind of dates some of you if you remember it when it was for a while back. That was very good though. I enjoyed it. All right, junior high, senior high. Megan, you gonna try again today, huh? So she had them last night too. So a double dose on a weekend. When you're a school teacher, whatever. Today we're going to continue in the series that was started last week on hope. It's called Hope Beyond. It's taken out of 1 Peter. So over the next 2 months primarily, we'll be having sermons from 1 Peter. So take note of that. Hope Beyond. Is anybody in here in trouble? There's police cars all around the church. Allison come in earlier and said that there was cars that way and cars this way, and I started looking around. Now there's 2 of you I don't know. So I did a funeral a number of years ago. This is about to get me in trouble, but I should have them shut the camera off. But I did a funeral a number of years ago, and when we come out, there's policemen all over the parking lot, and I'm thinking, it wasn't that bad, honest. So I'm not good, but it wasn't that bad. And they said, "Are you finished?" I thought, "Yeah, I believe I am." And they said, "Step over here to the side." So I did. Next thing I know, they've got this young lady in handcuffs. She had robbed a bank before she come to Grandma's funeral. So if one of you have done something like that before you come to church, I will have our deacons meet them at the door, and I'll go extra long. So good luck. Today I'm going to talk about personal suffering, hope beyond suffering. Let's talk about a little personal suffering. You've been hearing a little bit about that from the guys, but let's start out today by talking about, I want you to consider just how awesome and how great our God truly is, how He's magnificent. And we start looking at all that He's done and all that He has accomplished and all that we see as His handiwork. We stand amazed and we'll marvel at the unique wonders of His creation. But there is no more uniqueness of His creation than the human being. I want you to consider people and how much people, we can say how much they are alike. We can talk about how much they have in common, how similar they are, how they look alike. Now we can say that they don't look alike, but they're very similar. Now that's not true of the Klein boys. I can't tell them apart. Maybe you can. So, Mom, can you tell them apart, or do you still have their toes tagged? Okay, just checking. The rest of us, we have to put tags on them to know which one's which. But I appreciate it when you publish the haircuts so that I know which one I'm talking to. That's good. But for the most part, we're similar, but we're different. We are similar in behavior, but we are greatly different. We have different personalities. We have different taste in food, different taste in clothing and music and hobbies and jobs and on and on and on. So we have a great deal in common because we are a creation of God, but we have a lot of differences as well. Now, one of the differences that I will mention today is we all know what it is to suffer, but we all suffer differently. Everyone does it a little bit differently than others. Some hide it. I'm always amazed at the ones who hide their suffering. They may have been suffering for a long time before I really catch it. But all of a sudden it just kind of reveals itself to me, and perhaps where I can minister to them or because of experience. But many people try to hide their suffering. We'll know that people are going through marital problems, financial problems, whatever it might be, and they'll try to hide it from everyone else around them. Some just bottle it up. They'll just bottle it up and just store it inside, and it's just a nightmare for them. Now there's others that all you got to do is ask, and they'll share it with whoever asks. All right? I'm suffering. I want you to know, join with me and help me out. Some cry and some are angry, and there's just so many other ways that we look at suffering. But the thing is that we all suffer, and we suffer over various things. Our suffering is not limited to how old you are, or it's not limited to the religion or the country or the male or female. Joseph Parker, that's a preacher from many years past, a great preacher of years gone by, said to a group of young would-be minister students, preaching ministers, "Preach to the suffering and you'll never lack a congregation. There is a broken heart in every pew." What a true statement. What a true statement. A broken heart in every pew. Suffering is sometimes something that we all have in common. Now, how we deal with it that becomes a real issue. See, Peter has a grasp of dealing with suffering. We can think about his life and we can see that it wasn't an easy life. He had a tough job. He was a fisherman, and his income depended on whether there were fish, whether there were not fish. There was a lot involved. He had a family. It was a tough time in the area. They were under the suppression of Rome. He understands some suffering. And then, by the time he writes this letter, what else has happened? He's rejected Christ. And he's gone through the suffering of understanding what he has done. And fortunately, as he's invited back, he understands what that is as well. He's not had an easy life. So the writing of 1 Peter, I want you to understand that it's not going to be a pump you up session. It's not going to be, I'm going to make people feel better and rah, and I'm going to be your life coach, and you're going to just feel so much better when it's over because I'm going to do that. No, that's not where he goes. Instead, Peter gets them to take a look at Christ. A look at Christ that sometimes we forget. He wants them to look forward instead of looking around us right now. He wants us to look forward to where things are. In verse 6 of 1 Peter chapter 1, it says, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. You may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. Now we all know what it is to suffer. We all know that there's a lot of grief in every kind of trial that you're going to go through. But he says there is hope beyond your suffering. And that's where I want to go today. Hope beyond your suffering, because we're all going to suffer. We're all going to have that. And that's where he's going to take us. Let's start out in verses 3 and 4. Hope, whenever you suffer, there's hope beyond your suffering. When you suffer, the very first thing I want you to do is think. That's what Peter will tell us. In chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, it's going to say, praise be to the God and the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade, kept in heaven for you. One of our greatest mistakes during a time of suffering is we quit thinking. We quit thinking. Many times that happens in all sorts of things, that we'll quit thinking about what's going on and we start reacting. We react, folks. Whenever we react, we go on to an automatic pilot type of thing. And we start having a self-reliance instead of a godly reliance. We just have quit thinking. We start shutting down and going through the motions instead of trying to think this thing out. Where is this going to take us? We just go through motions of life. So life is beating us up because we're on automatic pilot. And whenever we stop thinking, that's what's going to happen. So he says, I want you to think. So Peter said to us, a living hope. So let's talk about a hope for living. Sometimes my days aren't easy, and I assume yours aren't either. Sometimes they're just really tough. Now, I can say that they're not tough because I have a difficult job. My job can be difficult, but it can also be very rewarding. But that's not why I have a difficult time. I can say that it's difficult because of my family. Well, that could be true too, but that's not my difficult days. I can say it could be difficult because of failures that I've had in life. And that's not either. My days become difficult because I have lost focus on Christ. Otherwise, I can deal with every issue of every day. As long as I am focused on Christ. It's whenever I start looking around and quit thinking and think, and I'm doing the thinking instead of looking to Christ, and I start, okay, I've done this terrible deed. How am I going to react? How am I going to protect myself? Or there's this thing that is going on in my family. How am I? You catch what I'm saying? How am I? It's all about what am I going to do? I have to stay focused on Christ. I have to realize that it's only through Him that my greatest hope will come. My days are difficult because of me, because I've lost sight, because I am the one that is not thinking. In John 10:10, it says that we might have life and have it more abundantly. I love that passage. That we might have it more abundantly. I can't have abundant life if I'm suffering. Now, you may think, okay, now wait, we suffer physically. I want you to think about your physical suffering. For all of you who have physical ailments and you're suffering from them, many have them. I can think Buford is suffering physically right now. I can think of others who are suffering physically right now. Pauline has been working on physical suffering. But folks, whenever we concentrate on that, all of a sudden we've taken our eyes off of the Christ. And we put it on our suffering. And I'm not saying that that's easy for us to keep our eyes on the Christ. But whenever we have physical suffering, don't lose where your hope's at. My hope for getting well, or my hope for dealing with this, isn't because I'm thinking it through, it's because I want Christ to think it through. So it's physical suffering. Maybe my hope has been challenged because of financial suffering or because of family suffering. Once again, if I'm the one who is trying to resolve it, I can't fix it. I can deal with it. But I can't fix it. But if I stay focused on Him and think, what is He wanting me to do? Then my life becomes more abundant. In Ephesians chapter 3, verse 19, it say, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. I want to be filled up with God, not with Mike. I want to be filled up with the hope that only God can give me, not what Mike gives me. My suffering often comes because I focused on my failures, on my grief, on my problems, instead of realizing the very power for living that God has given me. So if we relate that to Peter, it'd been easy for him to focus on the fact, I once denied Him. Oh, how I once turned my back on Him, how I once said, no, I didn't know Him, how I once cursed and said I didn't know Him. How easy it would have been for Peter to get locked up in that. But instead, Peter is able to take the gospel message and move forward and write to us on how we may get a handle on this. So I need to realize the very power that I have for living. A hope for living is what He has given me. Now that hope is a rewarding hope for eternal inheritance. Not only do I have hope because of my daily suffering, now I've got to deal with that daily suffering. I don't suppose there's a one of you here that doesn't have to deal with some suffering every day. We do. That's just who we are as a people. And whenever we don't have anything current to suffer on, you'll suffer on something that you did 20 years ago. You'll just dig it up and rehash it. That's what we do. That's who we are. And if that's not bad enough, you may go back to that kid you bullied in high school. Because I don't have anything more current to think about, let me work on that one. We do that. That's who we are. Or then we get to borrowing. Well, I can't think of anything current, so maybe I hurt someone's feelings. Let me worry about that for a while. I'll suffer over that for a while. All of those things come because I'm not trusting. And whenever I'm not trusting, now it takes away my eternal rewards. Because I've lost sight of where I'm headed and what I'm going to be doing. See, Peter is going to tell them about those eternal rewards here in verse 4. And into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade, kept in heaven for you. Kept in heaven for you. We're going to have those times of suffering. But if we continue to think, if I don't lose the thinking process, God is going to help me even in my suffering. He's going to help me even whenever I am suffering. Because He's going to say, Mike, I have all of this in store for you. I need for you to deal with life. Let me help you deal with it. Because someday, whenever you're through with that, I have all of this before you. Wow, doesn't that sound good? I don't know about you, but there's times that I look to those heavenly rewards and think, wow, I can't wait for that. That's exciting to me. That I'm going to have an inheritance that will never perish or spoil or fade. That I'm never going to carry the guilt, the shame, the burden, the failures that I carry every day. I'm never going to have to deal with the times whenever I think I should have got it right and I got it wrong, because all that's going to go away. And that's what Peter is telling us. So that whenever you suffer, don't quit thinking. Because, folks, you're going to suffer. The storms are about us. Don't quit thinking. Because when you quit thinking and you go on automatic pilot, you'll forget everything that Jesus has taught you. Because you're just going through the motions. Stay focused. The next thing he's going to say in verses 5 through 7, when you suffer, trust. Trust. Verse 5, who through faith are shielded by God's power until the coming of salvation. So during that suffering, I am shielded by His power until the coming of my salvation. That is ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief of all kinds of trials. These have come so that your faith of greater worth than gold, which is perish even though refined by fire, may be proved genuine and may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus is revealed. Now see why you were suffering? See the suffering that we're going through? This suffering has come so that your faith of greater worth than gold, and gold perishes, even though it is refined by fire, it'll perish, that your faith may be proven genuine and it may result in praise, in glory, and in honor. It seems that much of our suffering today that we go through, it's hard for us to understand. It's hard for us to understand. One of the first terrorist things that really jumped out at us, I know there were many, many throughout history, but if you remember, 1995 is when Oklahoma City took place. Most of us remember that. That was kind of the start of our modern day homegrown terrorist situation. And we kind of that one's become ingrained in our memories. I still see the images of the federal building and the face of it and the collapsing of it and all that was taking place. Oh man. And then we got the 9/11 anniversary. I think about that one as I'm with a woman having a baby. I'm in the hospital with a family. And they roll in a TV and say, see what's happening? And I said, it won't fall. I was so convinced that that tower wouldn't fall. I said, it won't fall. It can't fall. And it did. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget where I was at. Every one of you could tell me where you were at the day that come across the TV. Every one of us, that is embedded in us. I'm going to tell you folks, I don't understand such hatred. It's not in my mindset. I don't get it. I can get two kids doubling up their fist and fighting once in a while, but I can't get this type of hatred. It don't make sense to me at all. And then we would have an overdose of school shootings. And then there was one just recently back up here in Columbus I saw where some kid was with a gun. And then violence. People against people, police against people, and people against police. What's going on? Well, whenever this type of suffering is taking place, Peter says there's only one thing for us to do, and that's to trust. Then we've got all these natural disasters. Wow. We're getting a whammy of it this year with Houston and all that would take place, and with Florida now and all that's happening. I don't understand. And now Mexico and the earthquakes, it's not just limited to our country, it's around the world. And people suffer. And people suffer. It's hard to understand why people inflict pain upon each other. And you know, one of the troubles with the natural disasters that we're seeing, who would have ever thought, I did not do that. But now that I have your attention, who would have ever thought that you would have to worry about looting during flooding? You want my water-soaked TV? Come and get it. Who would have ever thought about that? Who would have ever thought of it? about someone stealing a car. I heard the other day that someone went home and their car was gone. I personally think it floated away. It wasn't going to start. But yeah, who would have thought about this? Why do people inflict pain upon each other? Well, it causes suffering. And people want to see others suffer. That's why we have so much terrorism. Terrorists want to see others suffer, even innocent people suffer. So what do we do in such a time as that? Whenever you suffer, folks, we've got to trust God. We've got to trust what God is doing. Even though we don't understand it, we realize that it's going to happen. I simply have to trust God. Now, who's better to tell me that than Peter? Because Peter is, we who know his history, know that he denied Christ, and he had to learn all over again. And my faith assures me that I have hope beyond suffering if I can trust God. So that may be our issue today. You hear a lot about God, and whenever you come here, you're going to get a lesson about God. But now I want to take you to your house. Are you trusting God? Are you trusting God? David was all ready to store up 6 weeks of groceries if it hadn't been for Robin. Are you trusting God? See, folks, for us to be able to understand suffering, hope beyond suffering, I have to trust God, because you can't store up enough provisions to take care of yourself. God, we have to trust Him. I have to trust that He's going to walk through the valley with me in my darkest days. And whenever those things that I've done haunt me, I have to trust God that He's truly forgiven me. Would you make the assumption that Peter was never haunted about his denial? Would you assume that just because Jesus said, come, I'm going to make you a fisher of men, come, I forgive you, that it never crossed his mind again? How many of you have been able to do that with things in your past? I can't do it. There's things in my past that are old. I'm old enough that they're old. And they still haunt me. Yeah. So I can't help but think that Peter at times was haunted by these. So he said, whenever you're doing that, I want you to trust God. Oh, I think there was days that Peter got up and he had to put his entire trust in God in order for his faith to carry him to the next level. Number 3, when you suffer, I want you to remember. We're going to do verses 8 and 9 here. 8 and 9. Though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you are receiving the goal of your faith, the salvation of your soul. When you suffer, I want you to remember, even though you have not seen him. Folks, Peter had an advantage. He's seen the Christ walking. I've seen the Christ where he's touched lives. I've not seen him in person, but my day is coming when I shall behold him face to face. That day will come. But right now, I just see his handiwork. I see how he's worked in your lives. I know all of you so well. I've been here so long that I can tell where he's worked in your lives. And whenever I've seen you grow a little and when I've seen you slide back a little, I've been able to detect those things. And I see the Christ working in your life. I see how he gives you hope beyond hope. See, that day will come when we will see him face to face. And it says, even though you have not seen him, well, I still believe. So in my suffering, I must remember how I have seen him work. So I want each of you right now to think about how you have seen the Christ work in someone's life. Not in yours. Don't think about your life. I want you to think about someone that you know, and you know that life couldn't have changed if Jesus hadn't been working in it. Every one of you know someone. That life wouldn't have changed on their own. That life couldn't have been scared enough to change on their own. But because Jesus was working in it, I want you to remember that person. I want you to put it right here and right here. I want you to remember how God was working in their life. And you're going to see how special He is. So it says, even though I've not seen Him, I still believe. I still have this hope. Even in your suffering, there are unseen and hidden blessings. You know, now that was a tough point for me. Even whenever I'm suffering, you tell me I'm being blessed. Preacher, what is wrong with you? That is not a blessing. Sure it is. I've said many times, and I say to you again, it's in the valley where the fruit grows, not on the mountains. So as you're walking through the valley and you're suffering in the valley, you're growing. And there's those unseen blessings. Do you ever find that sometimes, and I know that you have, whenever I'm suffering, I am more attentive to other people's suffering. I look around and realize that, like, maybe you don't have it so bad. You ever hear the expression, somebody's always got it worse than you? Yeah. Sometimes I look around and realize my little bit of suffering isn't quite as bad as many that I try to minister to. And then I start remembering how God has worked in my life. I have to see the very power of God working. And then I remember. So sometimes that power is in my suffering. Whenever I suffer, it makes me appreciate His blessings so very much. Most of us have suffered without Him. I want each of you to think about in your own life before you put Christ first and foremost, and I hope that you've already done that you've elevated Him to the place where He's your Lord of Lords and King of Kings, and that He's the one that you turn to during your most difficult times. I want you to think about that situation. Now I want you to back up 10 years and think about what it was like before you did that. I want you to remember how terrible your suffering was before you had the hope of Christ. See, sometimes my suffering makes me remember. I can remember things that I suffered for before Jesus was first and foremost in my life. And every year He gets a little bit more elevated in my life. I hope He does in yours. Every year He has a little more elevated place than He ever did before. I deal with Him a little bit differently this year than I did 2 years or 3 or 4 years ago. I have a little bit more faith and a little bit more trust and a little bit more hope than I did in those years. So as Christ is elevated in my life, I realize that sometimes my suffering is needed for me to appreciate where I've come from and where I'm going. I need to be able to do that. It helps me see others and their needs as well. So let's talk about a little bit of hope beyond suffering. Whenever we're suffering, some cry out, "Why me, God?" I cannot begin to tell you, if I'd kept records the last 47 years of that, well, why is this happening to me, Brother Mike? Oh, I don't know. What'd you do? No one likes that line, but when you're sitting there and say, well, why'd this happen to me? I don't know. Do you want to tell me? What did you do that made God so mad at you? I think that's the answer they're expecting. And in reality, I don't know why you're suffering. I don't know why you're going through that. You're asking the wrong person. Don't ask the preacher, ask God. Because I don't know. I know He gives me power to deal with it. So some will cry out, well, why me? Why my family? Why my children? Why my house? Why not their house? Why is my car broken down? Why didn't that other one break down? Yeah, many times, well, folks, everyone who says, why me, God? You're already defeated. You're already defeated. Now, why are you already defeated? Because you've lost sight of who God truly is. So whenever these crises are going on, instead of crying out, why me? I want you to cry out, help me, God. Help me. I think there were so many mornings that Peter got up and said, help me, God. Help me for the work I've got to do. Help me put my past in the past. Help me, God, I'm dealing with these issues or these things that I've done in the past. I think that's why he was able to write about hope beyond suffering. Every one of us suffer. Every one of us will have things that we suffer over our entire life. Some of you are suffering over things that took place years and years and years and years ago, and you haven't let them go. Some of you are suffering over things more recent. Some of you are suffering over things that are family related, and not even in your personal body, but family related. Some are suffering over economic issues. Some are suffering over our fear of what's going on in our country. It's a scary time. I find it a very frightening time in our country. Some of you are suffering over that. Some are suffering over, is God still around? There's all sorts of things we suffer over, folks. But if you want to have hope beyond your suffering, hope beyond your suffering, it's only found in Christ. If you don't find Jesus and put Him first and foremost, you will suffer every day. You're going to suffer a little every day. But with Him, you'll have hope for living. Hope for living. I need a new hope to face every day. Every morning I start out praying, God, help me with this day. Forgive me where I've failed you, and I can think of many. And I'll name a few. I'm sure He's tired of hearing them. I bet one of these days when I get to heaven, He's going to go, why did you have to remind me every day that you did that 25 years ago? You want to know what I did 25 years ago? I'm not going to tell you. I've told God this morning. Some days we just have to get started and say, God, help, help. Will you please stand as we have our invitation?